Excellent. Good morning. It looks like just about everyone's here, so we can start getting settled in and doing introductions. I think pretty much all of you know me. I'm Henry Burton. I'm the governance project manager for Levee Ready Columbia. And I want to welcome you this morning and thank you for taking time to spend half a day really digging into alternatives for future governance of the floodplain in the Columbia Corridor. A couple of quick notes as we come in. There are background material documents there on the table, and there's a sign-in sheet which we can pass around here in a moment just to see that everyone came. As you'll have noticed, probably we are on camera. And the goal of that is really to have a record of our deliberations and to be able to share that information with other people who are interested. I don't think we intend to post it on our website or distribute it broadly. It's really if somebody is interested in seeing what was discussed and how we considered the options, we will have that information available. So if you would prefer not to be on camera, you can switch places with one of the folks here at this side of the table and have your back to the camera. If you would like to be on center stage, you can come sit over here. So we have mics, and I think the audio should be reasonably clear. And so the cameras are rolling. Second, as you'll have noticed, we have some light breakfast over here and coffee. And we'll take a break at about 10:30 for a quick mental break and refreshments. And then we'll have lunch coming in at about 11:45 or noon. So I think when we get to the point on the agenda here at 11:45 where it says narrow down to preferred options, we'll also take a quick break there so that folks can grab some lunch and start eating while we finish the discussion. So that's it, and I think we can start with introductions.
Good morning. My name is Scott Shapiro. I'm an attorney out of Sacramento, California, and I act as general or special counsel for a number of flood control entities, many entities such as the ones you're thinking about possibly creating up here. I have a little bit of a connection to Portland and its collaborative style. I'm actually a graduate of Lewis and Clark Law School. Unfortunately, the economy in '94 was such that I couldn't practice law here, so I had to leave and go to Sacramento. But I'm so pleased that I'm able to come back and practice a little bit now. I'll be looking forward to helping facilitate this morning.
Hi, I'm Steve Fancher, Public Works Director for the City of Gresham.
This is Jim Gaston, Oakland County.
Stephanie Halleck with Oregon Solutions.
Carl Hostica.
Mike Jordan, Bureau of Environmental Services, City of Portland.
Phil Wilson, Port Portland.
Scott Robinson, Metro.
Ken Russ, Chief Financial Officer for the City of Portland.
Reed Wagner, Multnomah County Drainage District.
And Nolan Young, City of Fairview.
And Ray said he may be joining us a little bit late, so I think he'll still be here soon.
Nancy Henderson with BES.
Colin Ryan with Levee Ready Columbia.
Ryan Everhart, Levee Ready Columbia.
Sarah Morrissey, Levee Ready.
Joel Shane, Levee Ready in Multnomah County Drainage District.
I'm Emily Stump from Multnomah County Drainage District. That's Sunny Simmons from Multnomah County Drainage District.
Allison White, Multnomah County.
Tom Hansel, Multnomah County, and Sandy Drainage Improvement Company Director.
Excellent. And here comes Kevin Bryce. Good morning. Not a problem. We're just doing introductions. So welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Kevin Bryce. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers, Portland District. I apologize for being.
Not a problem. A couple of prefatory notes. Julia has background information there. And as you'll notice, we are on camera just to record our conversation in case other folks want to see how we came to our conclusions. We're not planning on distributing it widely, but we'll have that as a record of our conversation.
Thanks.
Yeah. And now, do you want to run through our agenda for today?
Why don't you do the agenda, and then I'll take over at that point.
So the goal of today's workshop is to dig into the alternatives that we're going to consider. It's the first time that we've really had an opportunity to discuss alternative governance models in any depth. The governance committee up to now has really focused on describing the status quo and documenting where we have shortcomings or what the issues are that we need to address. Today is the first time that we get to talk in depth about what the alternatives are and how we can improve on the status quo. And so our objectives today are, first of all, to understand what our options are, and then create some more specific criteria for evaluating them. So we've talked about the goals at a fairly broad level, things like having enough revenue and having a clear division of responsibilities, but we're going to try to refine those into more specific metrics that we can use to actually evaluate the options. And then we will discuss each of the options in turn. We'll have a sort of free-form discussion for a few minutes and then score them against those metrics. And we're just going to use a simple sort of good, bad, neutral scoring system, nothing fancy. And then we will, at the end of the day, try to cut our long list. We have 11 options right now. Cut that down to a shorter list of finalists, which we will continue to research and evaluate over the summer. So the goal is not necessarily to come out with just one recommendation today, but to come out with a few finalist options and identify the questions that still need to be researched and answered. And so the way we'll go through the agenda is to first we'll review our goals and talk about evaluation metrics. That'll be about half an hour, I think. Then we will briefly present the 11 options on our long list, what they would each involve. And then we'll have about 2 hours for a discussion of those options. Probably about 10 minutes then to discuss each one in turn. How would it work? What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? What problems does it not address? And then we'll score them against the criteria that we're about to develop. We'll take a brief break at 10:30 for refreshments and bathroom and chit-chat. At 11:45, we'll switch from the discussion to the narrowing down phase and try to move from the long list to the short list. So we'll have about half an hour for that and the last few minutes to discuss the next steps and questions for further research. Hopefully we will conclude at 12:30, and there will be lunch coming in at about noon. Or actually maybe 11:30. So we'll have lunch as we go through the last couple of pieces on the agenda. And after we finish at 12:30, we will switch into administrative subcommittee mode, and that's a lot of the same folks. So we'll switch into administrative subcommittee mode for a quick half-hour administrative subcommittee to talk about the agenda for the June 21st project team, some communications and public outreach items, and the potential or expected contract for a revenue and financial analysis of governance options. So that'll be a direct line from this discussion. All right?
Sure. Great. Well, thank you, Henry. So I wanted to talk a little bit about decision making and some recent studies that think about how people make decisions and take the results of those studies and apply it to the process that you're going to be going through today to show how challenging what you're trying to do, what we're trying to do, will be. And then do 3 quick exercises that will be very related to the decisions you're going to be making to try to get everyone into the mood of making decisions. So you may be familiar with some of the recent studies that show that people make excellent decisions when they're choosing between 2, and they make lousy decisions when they're choosing amongst 3. And it only gets worse the more options you throw in. And there are these studies that show Steve, what do you think? Which is better, A or B? And you say, oh, A. And I say, which is better, B or C? And you say, oh, B. Well, in those individual questions, we know the ranking is A, B, C. But if I say which is better, A, B, or C, you're much more likely in that scenario to now pick C. It just confuses our brain for some reason. And so binary decisions we do well with, and tertiary and beyond we don't do so well with. And so we're going to try to break today down into a bunch of binary-like decisions to the extent we can. And I want to start with 3 binary decisions that are pieces of some of the options we're going to look at to start helping people think about it. And so many people in the room are probably familiar with the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. And it's the federal statute that says when you're going to make a commitment of federal resources, a major federal action which will affect the environment, you have to do an analysis. And some people in the room will be familiar with CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. It is the California equivalent of NEPA. It's known in the trade as a baby NEPA. Many states have baby NEPAs. Well, there's an interesting thing about the decision-making process under NEPA and CEQA. Under NEPA, what you're required to do is to develop alternatives. You will quickly find my handwriting is horrible. And I can't spell when I'm writing in front of other people. So I'll apologize in advance for that. So you develop alternatives. What am I trying to achieve? Here are 3 different alternatives, 4 different alternatives, 5 different alternatives that achieve it. And one is always the no action alternative. CEQA takes a slightly different approach. CEQA says, come on, no one just comes up with alternatives. Everybody knows what they want to do, and there is a preferred alternative up front, and then there are other alternatives. And they evaluate the other alternatives against the preferred alternative, and then we figure out what's the best thing to do. We use it as a comparative tool, and sometimes we find the other alternatives are better, but we usually start off knowing what we want to do. A developer doesn't start off saying, what should I do with my property? Should I make it into a park or should I make it into condos? The developer knows the developer wants condos, but then we analyze other alternatives as well. So this relates a little bit to what we're going to do today. You've got 11 alternatives. At the end of the day, Henry would love it if you're down to 3, 4, or 5. The lower the number, probably the happier Henry is, because it's less work to research each one. Well, we can approach it like NEPA, where we simply say, of the 11, 8 are horrible, which leaves 3. Or we could approach it like CEQA, where we say, there isn't agreement in the room, but there's more weight in the room towards a particular one, and then these other ones are second, third, fourth. And so I thought we might start with a little bit of a discussion amongst the group about which model would work better for decision making today, which has the advantages, which have the disadvantages. Is this too politically fraught for people to start picking preferred and others? Is it safer to go with this? Or is it useful to let the people who will have follow-up actions know what the group thinks and then to drive towards it? So binary decision, no right or wrong answer. What does everyone think the better methodology is for today?
If I can ask a clarifying question.
Sure.
Who comes up with the preferred alternative?
The people in the room.
So,
You have the power.
so it would be at the end of the day, do we leave here with a preferred alternative and a few sort of runners-up, or do we leave here with just 3 options?
And you might have 2 preferred alternatives, right? You might say, we really can't decide between these 2, but man, in our gut, we think it's going to be one of these 2, but let's throw 1 or 2 more in to round it out to make sure that our analysis is correct. So there's any number of ways to do it, but since the goal at the end is to narrow it, I thought we should talk for a minute about what we're narrowing it to. Reed.
So, I'm not going to give an opinion. I have a question for Stephanie. Stephanie, what do you think the Levee Ready Columbia larger group would prefer to receive? Because this is about delivering something to that group, right?
That, of course, will be tempered by my own preference. It's always to be as decisive as possible. So, you know, my first gut reaction to what he was saying is that everybody has been at this for a really long time, and that I would tend to go in it with a little bit more direction from this group, but being willing to take a step back if necessary. But I mean, I think this is the leadership group, and the more we can narrow it down, the better. But you know, I'm not a stakeholder, so it's easy for me to say.
I'm even less of a stakeholder.
Can we wait till the end of the day to figure out whether there's actually a preferred alternative or alternative but I'm not certain that we're there yet to know that that's what we will end up with. But it may become clear during the course of the discussion that there is a clear preferred alternative or alternatives as we go through this discussion.
Well, absolutely, we can wait till the end of the day. The question, though, in my mind is, what's the goal we're aiming towards? And what I think I hear you saying is you'd like to aim towards a preferred alternative, you're just not sure if we can get there. Is that fair?
That's where I feel like at the moment, yes.
Okay. Carl, did you have your hand up?
Well, I was going to say the final decision makers are going to be the commissioners and the city councilors of the various units of governing bodies. So I think this group could get to maybe number one recommended alternative, but probably have to have a few more so that in case things don't go at that level. So you have the subcommittee, and then you have a working group or whatever it's called, then you have the elected officials. You have to work your way through it.
I think you're right. I can tell you in my role as general counsel for public agencies, there's nothing my boards hate more than me writing a staff report which doesn't make a recommendation. They just don't know how to proceed. And so it's nice if there's a recommendation out of this group, which I hear Stephanie saying is the ultimate goal. One question is are we ready today to try to figure out what it will be, subject to validation by the additional work Henry and the group will do?
Yes.
Yes, you agree with Ken that you'd like to try to get to a preferred today if we can.
Well, we need to get to a preferred, yeah.
Okay, Phil?
Yeah, not today. Well, I agree we can get to a short list today. I'm still in the learning mode this morning, so I want to, I'm not ready to declare a preference right now, but I think by the end of our session, I'll feel more comfortable about leaning toward a couple. So, I think we can get to a short list today, but I'm still in the learning mode this morning. I'm not ready to declare what that list is.
Okay. Right. Anyone else want to speak to this topic?
I agree with Michael. I think the quicker that this group can sort through the political go-no-go questions, the technical go-no-go questions, and narrow our options and give some direction, the better. But I do think that if you're looking at the list of options in front of us, it's a difficult task. So I can't. We may not actually wind up with a preferred alternative.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm Val Humpel. I'm Peninsula 2 Drainage District Board. What I imagine is actually functioning as some of the management characteristics of what we do now. I see the MCDD organization as being a central part of whatever we come up with, or at least the management of it. The problem is, as drainage districts, we're taxing folks about as much as we can, so we need somebody with more taxing authority and zoning authority to participate either as a primary unit or to cede some of that authority. But for me, we're running quite well right now. I hate to see the current functioning degraded. And I guess I'm looking forward to probable consolidation of drainage districts into a unit that's managed essentially by the folks that are running MCDD now. That would be where my preference is tending.
Okay, so you prefer reaching a preferred alternative today, and you've already identified in your mind elements of what that would be. Okay, great. Yeah, Nolan.
Before we get to a preferred alternative and alternatives, I think we sort of need to know whether we're after condos or parks, what the end thing will be, what it's supposed to accomplish, whether it is that type of thing or whether it is rave on steroids or what it ends up being.
Read on steroids, is that the quote? Could we get bumper stickers that say that?
I hope you know what I meant. So that we know what things we're solving with this preferred alternative.
Well, that's a great transition to where we're going to go in a minute, which is to talk about what the objectives are that we're trying to achieve. But I agree with you, you can't actually pick anything until you know what your criteria are. And so I'd like to do another quick binary discussion to help the group, because when I read through the 11 options, what I see is there's several elements, and you probably all see the same thing, that are repeated throughout. And so one of the ways to break it apart into an easier conversation.
Could I interject?
Oh, absolutely.
So wherever we end up today in terms of having or not having a preferred alternative, my understanding of our task is that by the end of the summer, we should have a recommendation. And as Carl mentioned, the ultimate decision makers are the elected officials, which are the drainage district boards, city and county boards, and so on, Metro and the port. But my understanding of our task is that this group should come up with a recommendation and probably some runner-up alternatives in case, as you said, the elected officials don't like our recommendation. And we send that to the elected officials and say, based on the research we've done, this is what we think is best, and now it's up to you to adopt or not adopt. But the question is just, how quickly do we identify our preferred alternative, I think.
Yeah. And what I hear is everybody in the room would like to try to identify it quickly, and we'll evaluate whether we can get there this morning. So let me turn to another binary discussion. And what I'm going to title this Focus. Because when you look at the 11 different options, what you really see is there's two different categories of options. There's what I'm going to call the sole purpose entity, and then there's the multi-purpose entity. The sole purpose is, by way of example, the 4 districts consolidating. It's a specially legislatively created entity that is solely in charge of flood risk management in the Columbia Corridor. The multi-purpose would be Metro being in charge of, the county being in charge of, the city being in charge of, okay? Everyone see the distinction between the two? So I thought it might be valuable, just for a second, without picking favorites, because that's not the goal. The goal is just to start thinking about this stuff, for us to list some of the pros and cons of the two different ways of having a focus of an agency. And then when we go back and we're going through the 11, and you go, oh, this one is a sole purpose, now I remember what my pros and cons were. Oh, this is a multi-purpose, now I remember what my pros and cons are. It'll take away some of the variables that'll make it hard to process all the options. So can folks just start throwing out pros and cons of sole purpose and multi-purpose? Just tell me which one it is and I'll write it down. Phil.
Sole, pro, focus.
Okay.
Dedicated focus.
Alignment.
By the way, if anyone writes better and wishes to do the scribing, just let me know. Okay, pros, cons, different options.
The con is parochials.
Okay, now you're requiring me to spell. Parochial. This is phonetic.
Sorry. Get some more big words.
Pros, cons, multi-purpose as well. Yeah, sure, sure.
I mean, I can foresee a scenario where you've got a group dedicated toward the management of what they do, but
right.
The funding comes from different entities. So
okay. So should we create a hybrid down here? Okay, let's not create a hybrid. Well, that's right. And by definition, some of the pros are going to be the same because of just what you identified, right? So we could, for example, say resources. Well, there might be pros for resources here because it's receiving funding from other sources, and there might be pros for resources here because you can borrow staff from the larger entity, right? You need expertise in an area and you don't have it, well, you borrow someone from the other one. So I'm going to put resources here. Some other pros and cons? Yeah?
Multi-purpose pro is that they may already have authorities needed for the function.
Great. Existing authorities.
The con is the lack of focus.
Yeah.
Okay.
A con on the sole purpose may be insufficient financial capacity.
Insufficient financial. Okay.
But the corollary con in the multipurpose is demands for resources from the program.
Competition for resources.
Mm-hmm.
Management turnover may be a con for existing multifamily groups.
Management turnover may be a con for here.
Elected officials changing more frequently, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Management churn.
Turnover of leadership.
We've talked about adaptability as one of the criteria of sole purpose, probably have a harder time changing course or doing these things.
But I wonder on the other side of that, if sole purpose could be more agile in getting things done.
Depends on how much
I'll write the question mark because you said I wonder if. Any, yeah.
Under sole purpose, the con, SDIC would be exposed to tax compression.
Okay. Compress, that's not right.
Scott, you might want to put just SDIC in parentheses because it's just one of the districts.
Sole purpose, pro benefits and burdens more directly aligned.
Any other big ones that come out? Yeah.
Well, a pro
Henry?
of a multi-purpose entity is you can have the agency have all the responsibilities that are involved. So the policy, the capital, the O&M, right now we have things split among several agencies, and it's not likely that a sole purpose entity would have the authority to do all the different parts of the puzzle. Yeah, so unifying your responsibilities in one place.
And I think the land use piece is an important part of it as well.
Right.
So then the con would be coordination, not on sole purpose.
Yes. Yeah, so the sole purpose is going to tend to require a lot of coordination with other entities.
Okay. Yeah. So.
With a pro and multi-purpose, maybe a potential larger tax base or financial.
I think you could probably guarantee the quality authority, but not the resource.
All right. This doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, but we'll take a few more that people have in mind.
Yeah, sole purpose pro, public reputation is dependent literally on its own performance, not affected so much by other aspects of a multi-purpose agency. So sort of self-determined reputation.
There's political installation there too. That I think is really important.
Okay. One more. Nolan.
Pro under a multi would be engagement, if you're part of the solution and you're engaged. And a con under the other would be lack of engagement. Because if you've got someone else doing it for you, you've got so many other things you're working on, you tend to forget about it.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing with this list. Oh, no. Yeah, Kevin.
So from a federal perspective,
Yeah.
I would think that the sole purpose would require the entity to have a very broad responsibility, because from our perspective, we're looking for having who's responsible for their maintenance, et cetera, to stay in the appropriate programs. So if you had one sole purpose entity, they would have a very broad responsibility. And I think that that's I'm not sure if it's pro or con. I guess I would go to the group. And likewise, on the multi, you have it divided. And so therefore, from a federal perspective, we'd be looking at different pieces to have, who's responsible, I guess. And I'm not sure what the answer is, pro or con. I just want to throw out from a federal perspective, that's what we would be looking at. Who is responsible for?
Yeah, and that's kind of this, right? That's more likely consolidated authorities in a multi-purpose, meaning everything could be in one entity, and you and FEMA and everybody could deal with the same entity here. So that's a pro here, and the corresponding con over here is the coordination. The fact that everything isn't in the same place, suddenly there's coordination between multiple entities required at a local level.
But I do wonder, I mean, so if you're looking at the system you've got right now, you've got cities and counties with primary land use authority along the corridor, and so you're always going to have some kind of interjurisdictional relationship. If you were part of the county, if you were part of the city, you're going to have crossover there.
That's right. And there is no right answer, of course, right? It's a balance where you're giving up something and getting something. You're getting something and giving up something, no matter which way you go. So did anyone have anything else they wanted to add to this before? Yes, Reed.
I'd like to steal Kevin's idea. And under a pro a sole purpose, I think it could be alignment with federal partners if given enough authority. Is that?
Okay. So align with Fed if authority. So for example, one of the models was the legislature could create an entity that can do what it needs to do, and then the cities and counties could cede land use authority. I'm not saying it's likely, but it could happen, and then you would have that very bullet point right there. Okay.
I think a potential pro, I think it's a potential pro for multi-purpose is legislative influence. You know, if it's the city of Portland and they decide that it's going to be a key piece of the state agenda, it influence a lot of different legislators towards that. Of course, the negative is that I think it's lost in a lot of other legislators too, but I think that is a pro.
Okay. So this is one of the few times I'm going to kind of take a vote because it's not meaningful, right? So you don't have to feel bad about it. I'm going to ask that we pick the most important in each of the columns and we circle it now. So we can kind of narrow all this down to what we think is the most important. So for pros, for sole purpose, we have focus, dedicated alignment, agile, align benefits and burdens, self-determination, reputation, and alignment with federal if authority. So I'm going to read each one. Just raise your hand if you think it's the most important in this column, and then whichever one gets the most, I'm going to circle. Very unscientific, okay? Focus, dedication, alignment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, okay? Agile, okay? Align benefits and burdens. Self-determination and reputation. Okay, and align with federal government if the authorities are all there. Okay, so not everyone voted, which is okay. You're going to vote in each column, just to be clear if I wasn't clear on that before. Okay, so now cons for sole purpose: parochialism, insufficient financial resources, difficulty adapting, tax compression for SDIC, challenges the coordination, and potential lack of engagement if all the authorities don't exist in the entity. So again, hands up on each one. Parochialism. Insufficient financial resources. Wow, we're just going to circle that. We're not even going to count. Okay. Let's move over here. Multi-purpose. Pros. Lots of resources. May have existing authorities that are necessary. More likely consolidated authorities to deal with land use issues. Larger tax base. Engagement. Engaged because they have all the authorities and have potential influence over the legislature and others as necessary. This one, there's probably going to be more counting involved. Pros, resources. 3. Existing authorities. 1, 2, 3, 4. More likely consolidated authorities, including land use. Larger tax base. Wow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. More likely to be completely engaged because they have all the authorities to do everything. All right, and influence over the legislature. 1. Okay, so we're going to go with, was it the larger tax base that everyone raised their hand for? I wrote it in the wrong place, didn't I? Okay. All right, cons for multi-purpose. We've got lack of focus, competition for resources, and turnover of leadership. So lack of focus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Competition for resources. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
That's a close
and
one.
Turnover of leadership. Okay, so I'm going to circle both because it's pretty darn close. Okay, so does this help anybody start to think about this multi versus sole thing? Because this is going to come up in every one of the different analyses. I wonder if, Henry, do you have good handwriting?
Sure.
Could you just write the largest pros and cons on one of those for each, and we can tack it up on the wall so we can kind of keep track of it? Okay, so how are we doing on time? Because I had one more, but I don't know if I want to take the time to do it. 9:15. All right, we probably should move on then. Okay, so we're supposed to move now to reviewing the governance goals and criteria. And one of the handouts that you have is evaluation criteria for governance options. And remarkably, if you read these, a lot of them are the very things we just put up on the board. Revenue capacity, cost efficiency, adequate legal authority, sensible and clear division of responsibilities, appropriate distribution of benefits and burdens, democratic control and equitable decision making, and political viability and stability. So those were the goals that, were these adopted or just developed at the staff level? What, do these have legitimacy or are they consensus?
We've discussed in...
This group wrote them?
Yeah.
Okay.
And at the last project team meeting, all agreed these were the correct goals.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they have been adopted and supported at the higher level as well.
Okay. So the question that I'm going to raise now is, I don't think it works really well to build a matrix where we say options 1 through 11, and then we list 1 through 7 down here, because these are a little bit amorphous sometimes to try to evaluate against. They're not very concrete metrics. They're absolutely great objectives and goals. And so I wonder if there's a way to try to think about specific metrics that can be used to evaluate each of the options, and whether folks agree with my assessment that we should try to be more specific, or whether you think these are the 7 we should use, and then we just say, okay, option number 1, as to metric 1, which is revenue capacity, is it good, neutral, or bad? Thoughts on this? I'm just facilitating. I don't make any decisions today. Yeah.
One thing on sort of a threshold question, it'd be helpful to me to understand whether everybody is committed to an answer to the question of the problem we're trying to solve.
Okay.
Are we just trying to get the levies up and keep the levies up? Or are we trying to have a more holistic management of the Columbia corridor and on a more widespread distribution of burdens, I would say, because the benefits are probably more widely distributed than a lot of people think. So it would be interesting to me at least to have an answer to that question.
Okay. Well, what are reactions to Carl's question? What are we trying to achieve here? Is there agreement on what we're trying to achieve?
So to that point, there's an entry, if you read the evaluation criteria, it says, the first thing is have the ability to raise sufficient and sustainable revenue to achieve its mission. I think what you're asking is what's the mission?
Phil?
Well, the last version of the Declaration of Cooperation, we'll go back to that. And I'm assuming that still has standing. We declared 2 things in particular. One was we need to get reaccredited and stay in the GRIP program. So those were the minimum goal. 2 sub-elements. The second big chunk was, while we do that, consider other community values, recreation, natural resource enhancement, longer list of other things to consider while we meet that primary goal of reaccreditation and staying in the RIP. That's my recollection of the mission of the group. Is that,
Well, the other thing that
sound accurate?
it does, the other thing that I would offer, just as the Oregon Solutions person, in terms of the group maturity, I mean, I think everybody has agreed that for 2 years, whatever, this sort of loose coalition that Oregon Solutions has been facilitating has been okay. But, you know, now we're at the point where we're not done, and the really hard stuff is going to start happening. And does there need to be a more formal structure to deal with the future?
In support of mission number 1.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so Phil, I hear you say goal 1 is stay certified levies, stay in the Corps' RIP program.
NFIP in the grip.
Right. And then 2 is we need to explore this broader issue. I'm going to suggest that it may be implicit within number 1 for you, but I'm going to make it 3 as explicit, which is ensure, can't even spell, ensure adequate flood protection, or minimize risk, right? Because, and I know we've talked about this, I know you feel the same about it. This is an arbitrary standard that has been set nationwide for a bunch of reasons. This is what the Portland community needs, right? If staying certified means you can ensure you have a 100-year level of protection, and for those in the room who haven't thought about the statistics, a 1 in 100% or a 1% chance of flooding essentially is equivalent over a 30-year period to a 26% chance of flooding, which basically means that if we have 100-year level of protection, we have about the same level of protection over a 30-year period as pulling a face card out of a deck of cards. It's not so high. Doesn't feel so good when you think about it that way. You're going to risk your community over a 30-year period. Here's a deck of cards. If you pull a face card out, you flood. If you don't pull a face card out, you don't flood. Right? So it's not just this, it's also this. And once you get through this, as I've learned in my 15 years of doing this now, you never get to there. There's always a new there beyond the there you're aiming for. And so whatever structure you're developing needs to be thinking about this in addition to the Portland way, which is, well, let's look at recreation and environment and all the other factors that are important to our community. By the way, it's the California way too, so. Okay, so are there other missions? You're the one who raised the question of mission.
Well,
are there other missions?
Why I raised it is because, you know, I'm sort of looking down the path here that we may be on. It's quite possible that when you get to some jurisdictions having to cede some of their authority, that they might just say, no, we don't want to do that, just get the levies fixed and we're fine. Especially on the land use side. So the question is, how hard are we going to push if we're going to look at things other than certifying the levy?
Yeah.
If I could, and please know, folks, that I just want to upfront a disclaimer kind of thing. I realize from a federal perspective, I don't want to get involved in local decision. I'm trying to play that advisor, if you will, from a federal perspective. So I apologize, and if you need me to shut up, please someone tell me that. So I just want to admit that. But I would submit, from my perspective, that what you wrote, number 3, the right words associated with that, to me, is the overarching goal. The overarching goal is to provide appropriate flood risk management for whatever's behind the levees. And that's the primary purpose. And everything else, how you do that are things like staying in federal programs, considering other options, how do you fund it, et cetera. And to me, that's an overarching goal that I would recommend be the focus of what is the most efficient way of accomplishing that flood risk management appropriate to what is behind the levees. And so I would argue that's an overarching, and the rest of these and these criteria need to meet that overarching purpose. Because that's what the districts are right now. They're responsible for providing flood risk. So I would argue that that's an overarching, and everything else is supporting.
So can I ask a question on, because to me, that this is sort of the crux of future messaging for this group, to your point, that if this group is going to be unified around message number 3 with whatever it comes up with, that's, to me, a much stronger and more unifying message than number 1. And because, rules come and go, laws come and go, presidents come and go. And so if we are unified around number 3 regardless, I think that's what the public's going to have to hear and what everybody's going to have to hear regardless of what model we pick for the future.
Well, I think 3 is absolutely the goal, and 1 is what led us to this table, right? But what leads us to continue this dialogue, particularly at this table, is the misalignment between the current governance structure and the ability to guarantee 3. So, and that's the real issue. You don't have who do I go to for responsibility at the federal level? You don't have basically capital responsibility to obviously execute on that third goal as well.
Yeah, the 4 districts can achieve this with less problems than they can achieve this, right? The 4 districts can achieve this if people stay at the table, if there's money from other sources, if the land use entities cooperate on dealing with encroachments that'll prevent certification. But this is well beyond the capacity of 4 districts jointly saying, Reed, go do something. Phil?
Or I would submit the current model still accomplishes 3, however, each can be done differently, and each district can and does things differently depending on the resources, desires, and needs. However, it still accomplishes the providing appropriate flood risk as defined by those separate districts within the program. And the question is that best for the whole or not, is what I would argue. Because that's the purpose of the drainage districts in their individual mission, is to provide number 3 for their area. And the question is that the most efficient way of doing it for the long term or not, which is kind of, I think, what's fascinating.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Well, I may be hung up on something. Is there a difference between flood risk and surface water management risk?
Well, he says yes.
Yes.
So explain why you think there is.
Well, the drainage districts authorized to drain the land, make it useful for agriculture. Originally, the authority wasn't granted to protect from floods. It was to remove the water so you could use the land. Let it flood, then pump it out.
And much of the management, I'd say much of the management is actually extraterritorial surface water management. So I understand the flood issue. I get that. That one's clear. But there's a lot of surface water management that the districts do now where the water is coming from somewhere else and they're managing it basically to the Columbia. And that management is broader than just hydraulic management. There's also water quality management issues involved there. So flood risk is predominantly hydrology. That's how I would interpret it. But it seems that the mission is broader than that.
So you're questioning whether this is an adequate word.
Yeah, whether it covers the whole landscape of what we expect of the district's name.
So if we did,
so we use the term surface water management because we have to manage both the hydrology and the water quality issue, or try to.
Yeah, otherwise it's not a discharge solution.
appropriate flood risk and surface water management for what is behind the levees. Awkwardly worded, but essentially what your point.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there anyone that thinks that number 3 isn't the primary goal of what we're trying to create?
Well, the only thing I think I would point out is, I mean, one could argue that number 3 sort of pushes us into the multi-purpose model rather than the sole purpose. I'm not necessarily advocating that, but I think it's something to explore. What you define the mission that way? Can you achieve number 3 with a sole purpose entity?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. I tend to view the question as at least 2 facets. One is governance and the other is management. And there are multiple combinations that can work to meet some of the criteria that are in this document. I'm not sure you can meet all the criteria adequately with the same governance and management structure. I think you're going to need some combination of those things.
Scott,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to ask you to have a different hat on. You get to see communities across the country come up with governance structures that solve multiple problems in different political environments. To Mike's point about solving surface water management issues as well as flood risk management issues, have you seen models of doing both versus doing them separately, the pros and cons of them in different areas? Or can you think of any examples?
The models that I'm mostly familiar with, they are separately managed but coordinated. And there's a great example of the Sutter Butte project where Sutter Butte, which is the capital agency that was improving the levees, needed a source of borrow to strengthen the levees. And so it went to the local city and said, we need a borrow source. And the city said, great, we need a retention basin. And they partnered, and the borrow came out of the retention basin, and the city got a retention basin to manage its surface water, and the agency got the soil. I think you're right in your comment that it's unlikely everything will be in one. There's going to be some level of coordination required, and it's going to be interesting whether the coordination is required at the governance level, at the management and authority level, or at the financial level. Right? That's probably where you're going to end up at the end is, which are the ones you're willing to say, yes, we can coordinate around that issue? Phil?
I think, I mean, I agree with 3, and I think in practice this group is already moving toward 3. We've already dedicated, what is it, $250,000 to a risk assessment model. And so we're moving beyond 1 into 3. I think the language of 1 still is a legacy of some conversations and documents that are about a year old. But we need to shift toward 3, at least for this group, because that's where we're putting our money right now. We're developing a risk assessment that goes, a model and a tool that goes way beyond 1. But also with 3, there's a risk of scope creep, and that's where we need the broader community input. There's also some interest beyond just surface water management, potentially using an agency like this to be a natural resources mitigation bank. Get it? So that's another phrase that you could shoehorn into that longer sentence. Park district, you know, Southeast Louisiana flood control has law enforcement. So there's ornaments that we can hang off of 3, but I think the core of 3 is risk management, at least. And whether it's also water quality, surface water, and all those other things, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about.
So I'm doing a lousy job keeping us on agenda, but I think this is a valuable conversation. So I'm going to play with 2 more things here and then try to get us back unless other people want us to stay here. It seems like everyone in the room agrees this is where we should be heading. Does everyone agree that number 1 is an important milestone along the route to 3? Is there anyone who disagrees that 1 isn't something we're trying to achieve as an interim? Okay, it's a step towards this. It's one of the metrics that'll be used to evaluating this. Okay. So the second is, has everyone heard the term co-equal goals? So California loves this phrase, co-equal goals. It's how we get around trying to prioritize different things that we can't ever get political agreement on prioritizing. And so the California Delta, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, is an amazing estuary that has water supply benefits and it also has environmental benefits. And the legislature said there are co-equal goals. Neither is more important than the other. And that's a different model from the highest goal is water supply and the secondary goal is environmental or recreation or whatever. So is there agreement in the room as to whether number 3 is one of a co-equal goal and another might be recreation or environment or park or mitigation? Or does everyone think it is the preeminent goal and everything else is important but never more important than this?
I'm just going to reflect what the current community position is as documented in the latest collaboration agreement. And it's not co-equal goals. The primary goal is flood risk management, and those other ones are values to consider and are subservient. So that's my recollection of the current documented community view. We can adjust that potentially, but that's the way I read it. Is that accurate?
It's the way it is in the last document.
Yeah.
Does anyone in the room think that it should be changed? Okay. Because it's easiest when there is a preeminent goal, all right? Because then everything else can be measured against that. It doesn't mean you don't consider other factors, and sometimes you'll compromise a little bit for other factors, but it does mean you don't compromise flood risk management for the environment or flood risk management for recreation. Okay. So do you feel like you have an answer, Carl, to your question of what our mission is?
Yeah.
Number 3.
I emphasize it as a heavier political lift, and we have to continue so that we can keep in mind what the end game might be.
Okay.
Can I make a real quick comment relative to that, Carl, because I think it's a great question. The boards at the district level struggle with the mission of the boards every time we meet and when we're passing budgets. Where do we put the money? How far out do we go? One that came to Multnomah County Drainage District just last week was whether or not we would take on an easement for recreational access to the slough, and the board voted no. We aren't the appropriate agency to take on that recreational easement because that's not our primary mission. So in that case, we deferred. So that's just an example where at the board level, we struggle with that every meeting about, is it 1 or 3 and what's the scope of 3?
Welcome to being elected.
But anyway, that's a practical example of at a very on the ground level about what our mission is.
So the question that I asked that got us into this very helpful conversation was, what are we going to use as the metrics? Are the metrics the 7 objectives, or are the metrics different, more specific, broken down, or some more important than others? What do people think about that issue?
Well, I would just offer that a lot of work by people in this room have gone into creating these metrics, and I certainly wouldn't recommend starting over. I mean,
we don't have time for that.
There is narrative under each one of these, and maybe Henry wants to speak to it, and perhaps they need to be narrowed down or some better system than like you were saying, this giant matrix would probably be really helpful. But we all agreed on these, we all approved them at the last meeting, so I think we need to sort of figure out how to use them.
Well, then I would propose that we use them, and we may add 1 or 2 or 3 if there are things we think aren't adequately reflected. The thing I worried about was the focus issue. It's not clear to me whether the focus issue is reflected in there. Maybe it's part of one of them. So to me, that's one that we might want to add at the end. But that also prejudges, right? Focus tends to prejudge sole entity.
So I guess the other thing, since I've met, Henry's been a facilitator for the governance, and I've been the facilitator for other parts of this. The people who are on the governance subcommittee, it might be worth asking those folks where they're ready to be in this discussion today. I mean, are they ready, like Sabi Island, to say, this is the one I want? Or, I mean, I don't know how ready you guys are. You've been meeting a lot and doing a lot of work on this. And maybe you are ready to sort of get into the debate about among individual options. I don't know, but I'm curious.
Anyone want to react to that?
I think we're ready to debate the options today. At some point today, I think that's why we're here. And so.
What I thought I heard before when we talked about the NEPA versus CEQA approach is everyone agrees the list needs to be shorter. And everyone would like the list to be down to a preferred and a few others if it can be achieved today, and we'll see whether that happens. So maybe we just need to get into it then.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd be afraid of exhausting people's attention. I think we've been able to keep people around the table and focused for a while. If we don't get into some decision making, I fear that other priorities are going to start pulling people away from the table. So I'd really like to move forward and stop ourselves if we feel like we're getting too far now.
Yeah.
Regarding the evaluation criteria, the governance committee and the Levee Ready project team have discussed the goals at a broad level and definitely committed to those. At the more granular level of the points underneath, we haven't had a lot of time to dig into, exactly what is minimal and what is preferred under each of these goals. And I think as we go through the discussion of options, we may want to tweak some of that. But I provided this document as a guide for our discussion, and with the understanding that it would be a basis for further discussion, that it doesn't need to be a set in stone final document. But I think as we discuss, we should be prepared to say, maybe some of these aren't minimal. Maybe they're preferable but not minimal. Or maybe some of the preferred criteria are really essential. And maybe there's something that I didn't think of.
Okay, then let's start off with lines. Who's really good at drawing straight lines?
We can use that thing for lines.
Come on. You want to do it? Okay. So while you draw lines, we'll start our conversation. So why don't you work on this one, and we're going to have at least 7 criteria down here.
Okay.
And we're going to have 11 options 1 through 11 up here. So we'll have a grid. We'll have a grid.
Okay.
And then we're gonna color in the box in a color depending upon what we think it's good, neutral, or bad.
And we have several markers if you don't.
Yeah. So if you can do 1 through 11, and then probably A through G or H, and a grid. And while you draw lines, we're going to talk a little bit. Okay?
Sure.
Thank you.